We are live.
Oh, snaps. What's going on, everybody? We are back with the Gainzcast Live. We have a special guest today. This guy's been in the industry a long time. He's done a lot of things that you wouldn't have given him credit for and been responsible for some really breakout brands and concepts and ideas. And most notably is the guy who completely sodomized Twin Lab with the EAA, with their EAA product, which is absolutely astounding to watch. It was the biggest verbal beatdown I've ever seen on the internet that didn't involve Ben Shapiro. He just completely obliterated this gentleman with science and did it with a really cool Kangol hat at the same time. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenton Engel, what's going on, brother?
What's up, man? I don't know how I'm going to live up to that introduction. I hope I can, but yeah. The Kangol hat especially. That was like the kicker. The mid-90s.
You don't have the Kangol hat anymore.
Yeah, I know. I retired it.
I'm leaving.
After that fucking performance, that was one of those, like, you frame the jersey and you hang it up in the arena. Because let's kick it off.
Yeah.
So let's go with it. Let's go with amino acids. Let's just go straight on the hot topic. We're all very busy guys. And that's what this man's become known for. And I don't know if you even want to become known for it. Like, I'm the guy who, we kind of have two of the pioneers in amino acids in the industry, me popularizing, not inventing, popularizing the intra-workout category, and Kenton going in and just solidifying the research and the data and kind of giving us argumentative purposes. Now, with EAA versus BCAA, that was a huge, not controversy, a discussion. But what happened is all of us agree, I think I can speak for all three of us, that they're amino acids. They're not, none of them are bad. Like EAA are BCAA and vice versa, because BCAA are 3 of the 9 essential amino acids. So what the essential amino guys are saying is basically BCAA don't do anything, they're bunk. But if you fairy dust in these magical other essential aminos, it makes them anabolic nirvana.
Yeah.
And also, if you don't do that, BCAA will cause cancer, diabetes, and potentially syphilis and chlamydia. Am I off on that?
Those are the 2 worst ones. It's the syphilis and chlamydia that get you. I can handle the ass cancer. It's the syphilis.
The ass cancer? Hey, man, you're speaking to a cancer survivor.
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
Be careful. Be careful. I got the fuck cancer hashtag. Yeah. Hashtag survivor.
Get the ribbon.
Yeah, there is no ribbon for it. What the fuck? So Kenton, can you delve into kind of your opinion, broad or focused, whatever you want to do, on amino acids, BCAA versus EAA, and their potential role in training and AKA gaining lean mass, preserving lean mass, and potentially losing fat, or any other benefits they preclude?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing is, like, on a notoriety basis, you're right that I don't have any particular proclivity towards examining the role of exogenously administering amino acids and the physiological impact on muscle protein synthesis. I just have ADHD, so I get particularly excited about any sort of debate. And so if that guy would have contradicted my opinion on the genealogy of bulldogs, I have 3 bulldogs, I would have been equally affected. I just have a constitution that tends towards affectations and histrionics. The other thing, though, that I find is constellated in this issue is that in our industry, right, we have a certain amount of discursive spaces. What I mean by that is podcasts like this, or Fitness Informant, or Price Plow, where discourse tends to guide people's thinking.
Yeah.
And the problem
Let's give Brian a shout out here.
Yeah, that's Brian's asshole nickname for me. Let's pretend it doesn't.
There he is, Brian.
Yeah,
Brian
he's right there. Yeah.
Yep, there is.
And so the problem is that the tendency in popular culture writ large for very specific, deliberately specific, narrow scientific findings to percolate into public consciousness is, like, to your point, Mark, Robert Wolf destroys BCAAs. That tendency is what bothers me. What bothers me is bad methodology.
Yes.
And so in the context of amino acids, the reason why I went after Real is that they were propagating Wolf's research, despite the fact that this is Dr. Robert Wolf, who wrote what EAA evangelists consider a seminal 2017 article that's ostensibly this fatal blow towards BCAA anabolism, or BCAA-driven anabolism. But the article had no systematic methodology, had no inclusion or exclusion criteria that would mitigate or prevent against what's called selection bias in research, followed no standards, followed no protocols, didn't disclose the fact that Robert Wolf has an economic interest in promoting EAA formulas because he holds the patent for it. He himself didn't disclose that what's called the phenylalanine forearm balance methodology for detecting the fractional synthetic rate of muscle protein synthesis, where you infuse someone's forearm with isotopically labeled products of phenylalanine on the one hand and leucine on the other hand, because phenylalanine's only intramuscular destination is for protein synthesis. So you're looking for the difference in the rate of clearance, right? And that differential expresses for the rate of muscle protein synthesis. He himself wrote an article 3 years before he published that piece of shit saying that it's outmoded. He was the founder of using an endogenous leucine metabolite called D10 as a more accurate detection or quantification methodology for protein metabolism. So that bothered me. That tendency has continued. So there was an article published last year by a dude named Daniel L. Plotkin. Brad Schoenfeld and Alan Aragon were co-authors.
Okay.
And it was better than the Wolf article, but it suffers from some of precisely the same methodological insolvencies. But those insolvencies don't percolate up to the surface in our discursive spaces. So, for example, someone asked me about it and said, I think this is conclusive. BCAAs are done. And I said, do you know the difference between a narrative review, that's what this study was, a research article, I should say, and a systematic review? And they said, no. And I said, do you know the difference between either of those and a meta-analysis? And they said, no. And I said, well, what the fuck are you talking about then? So like when we're talking about data that isn't testing hypotheses, where it's not engaging in the full verisimilitude function of science, which is to distinguish between the truth and falsity of declarative statements or declarative hypotheses about the way that certain physical or empirical properties work, they're a review. But reviews still need to conform to scientific principles. So a meta-analysis is a meta, so above level of a bunch of data that uses a robust and systematic methodology, including inclusion and exclusion criteria. So they tell you and I, Mark, I included this data for this reason, and I excluded this data for this reason. That controls for subjective or self-selection bias. It says, I use these computational models to statistically analyze the data and produce for this new finding. It says, I have a specific hypothesis in mind that I am constructing this meta-analysis to test. And so therefore, you and I could ostensibly replicate this data. That's meta-analysis, right?
Yeah.
Next level is a systematic review, which expresses for all those same tendencies, save for the computational algorithmic ordering. Still has inclusion criteria, still testing a hypothesis, still systematic and robust. Below that, which is what first-year BSc students produce, is a narrative review. A narrative review has no standards, it has no protocols, it has no exclusion or inclusion criteria, it doesn't control for self-selection bias.
Yeah.
It's one person's opinion about the data, and that's what this 2020 Plotkin article was about. Now, this becomes self-contradictory and problematic at a certain standpoint because there's a section about 5 pages in where he notes all the methodological problems with a lot of BCAA research. He, for example, says that they don't control for protein intake, huge problem. They don't control for exercise activities, which is a huge problem because not only does increased exercise activity proportionally increase lean mass and so therefore proportionally increase amino acid demands, but increased exercise activity also increases immediate amino acid synthesis like oxidation, right? They produce for the keto acids of leucine, valine, and isoleucine. So you get a higher clearance rate. They didn't control for age, they didn't control for all these factors. And then he goes on to utilize studies that have all those same methodological defects and never considers whether or not those substantiate, and this is the most important point, the utility function of BCAAs. So let's say this utility function point is important. So I'll ramble on for a second. Then I'll
No, that's good.
So let's say, Mark, you and I are writing an article, and the article is called "This is Why Ferraris Suck." And we spend the first...
I dissent. Ferraris are cool.
Yeah, okay. But let's say we're writing the article.
Okay.
So let's say we're writing the article that Ferraris suck. And for the first 5 of 9 pages, we engage in this sort of onanistic or masturbatory mechanistic explanation of how Ferrari engines work. And then the conclusion of that is that Ferraris have bad fuel economy. And then for shits and giggles, we also throw in that Ferraris don't have great child safety features and they're not good at getting groceries. Why is this analysis problematic? Because no one fucking buys a fucking Ferrari because it has good fuel economy.
Yeah.
Right? So the problem here is that our study of why Ferraris suck didn't parameterize what econometricians call the utility function. And a utility function is a calculation of the utility derived from a consumptive exercise. So let's say you buy your phone, Mark. There's a certain utility that you derive from using your phone. And if I wanted to understand your rational choice to allocate a certain amount of your resources to purchasing that phone, I have to compute and therefore express for the utility function. I need to understand how your utility, your relative satisfaction with your life changes with that purchase. In these studies, so in both the 2020 Plotkin article and the 2017 Wolf article, the top line conclusion is that whole proteins maximally stimulate the fractional synthetic rate of muscle protein synthesis, and BCAAs don't. No kidding. But who's saying that? What marketer of BCAA, who's saying that anymore?
I never have. The most I've ever reached for is MPS.
Exactly.
I think the protein stat study done by Norton, Lane, and whoever else, it just basically was saying that, hey, you can basically go without the calories, but still get the MPS between meals, allowing for more infrequent feedings. And, you know, the study that I sent you that was never, ever published, God damn it, I'm pissed at that still, you know, that we did with Stepani and the College of Charleston, which was a collaborative study, which I think you can understand why we did a collaborative study, because it, in my opinion, it removes all doubt. Because you have two people who don't talk to each other, reaching similar conclusions, working together indirectly. It was an awesomely designed study, and the protein was accounted for. As I sent you that write-up on it, the protein was accounted for, the carbs were accounted for, there were formulas and there were body weights and there were diets presented to all 36 individuals. And it was shocking. Like everybody, like you saw Stepani's direct quote, like everybody involved in the study, like looked at this, like involved, like we saw it. You know, as you fund the study, if you're done correctly, you don't talk to the researchers till afterwards. And even then we were like, this can't be right. Like you had 9.5, I think it was 9 pounds of lean mass gain, 4.5 pounds of fat loss for the 14 gram BCAA group, accounted for calories. The whey protein group was 4 pounds of lean mass gain, 2 pounds of fat loss. The control group, which was Gatorade, AKA basically carbs, they gained 1 pound of lean mass and lost 0 pounds of fat. So basically what we're showing is supplementation, right? Like everybody got gains. Like gaining 1 pound of lean mass on a hypercaloric diet without actually without gaining fat is fucking great. Yeah. And it was posterized at the ISSN, so it did have a poster. I believe it. I don't remember the year, probably 2009. But you know, at the end of the day, you know, I think that 2010. I think that there's a lot of confounding variables with amino acids. How to use them, how to supplement with them. And I think if we were talking about an HMB issue, where HMB does have effects in beginners, if you look at the data, it does pretty well in beginners, but as you get more advanced in training, it doesn't do much. Yeah, then I could argue that
metabolism changes.
You can just take more leucine at that point. Yeah. So if it was HMB where it was cost prohibitive, I'd be like, yeah, you know what, think it through. But BCAA have come down in price so much, and EAA. And I'm not one to bash BCAA or EAA. I'm more of a leucine and surround it what you love kind of guy. If your diet is whole with complete protein, if you do eat adequate protein, I do believe that the BCAA during training, based on the data I've been involved in, that unfortunately wasn't published, you know, is adequate and is essential, and not essential, but I think it will add to the ergogenic benefits of one's training in a very cost favorable way.
Exactly. Now, yeah. So
let's go ahead and opine on that.
I was going to say, if that was the utility function that was parameterized in Wolf's article, it's not an article. And that's one of the other things that made me mad about Twin Lambs, is that had either Wolf or this newer article, and I should really say this DL Plotkin did a much better job, but had they started with that more mitigatory sentence that BCAAs are useful in the supplemental context to temporarily maximize muscle protein synthesis and hide it, right? That doesn't get published. So there's an incentive. Their incentives are perverse for taking this non-controversial statement that most marketers of dietary supplements are making in 2021 and recalling to things that people used to say about BCAAs in 2000s. That's intellectually dishonest, because I agree with you. I think that these are my conditions. So if you take two protein-controlled populations with equivalent training lengths of, let's say, 3 years plus, and you did a longitudinal study of 6 months or more, provided that they're not training in the fasted state, which is where EAAs probably have a benefit because the free-floating amino acid pool is lower and your body's engaging in gluconeogenesis and using amino acids and tissue to produce glucose from non-glucose intermediates, they're going to have the exact same results. And there is likely, like you said, an ergogenic benefit associated with maximizing muscle protein synthesis for individuals over a certain, let's say, anabolic or synthetic threshold in combination with whole protein, or using them in situations of inadequate protein feeding, which, by the way, is, I think, the use case for BCAAs. So it bothers me when people write research studies on BCAAs and don't acknowledge the common use case. They don't talk about why people actually buy them or why people make them. What are we talking about?
Yeah, I think when in a hypocaloric state, and even
Yes.
hypercaloric, in a hypocaloric state, I think they serve the most benefit. But remember, the extent study was done in a hypercaloric state, which leads, there's a lot more studies that need to be done. And that's the thing about studies, you know, and that's the reason I'm going to use the pandemic that just happened. That's when I knew shit was weird, when they started using the word prove. You know, I would never come out and say the study we did on Extend in 2009 proves that. No, what it does, we need to find out why in a hypercaloric state. We need more studies. We need more data. We need more masters and graduate students to get out there and get this research and get it funded. And I understand, like, there's a lot better things to research, you know, like AIDS and like COVID and shit. Like, you know, I understand. Yeah, I understand that getting a bodybuilder bigger and leaner isn't exactly the focus of a lot of research institutes. That's a lot of people realize. Like, why don't you do the study? I'm like, you know, it costs like $300K
exactly.
for a study. Like, a lot of companies, I can't afford a $300,000 study right now. I know Kenton can afford a couple. He has a couple going on right now. But a lot of these guys, you know, you have to have funding. And unfortunately, what that does is it allows. One thing is, it doesn't allow us to have cool studies, and we have to go by existing data and extrapolate our own conclusions from it, like we're doing now. We're talking about existing data, just like the meta-analyses and the analyses that all these guys like Aragon and Al are doing. But also, it allows for complete ass clownery, where someone like Dr. Wolf, who has a financial interest in a brand, can pull the most absurd conclusion from existing data, call it a study, and all of a sudden the internet erupts and says that branch chains are dead.
That's what bothered me.
What it does, it opens up more questions. And, you know, it did force me to look into EAA more. You know, oh shit, sorry. I got to find where I was at.
We got technical difficulty.
I am not in my normal spot. I got this though. I'm totally on it. I'm totally, I know what I'm doing here. There's awesome. There's absolutely no,
no problems here.
No problems at all. Just got
Here
to
at the
find out
Gainzcast, we hold the utmost high professional standards.
Exactly.
Hey man, so professional that I'm literally doing this from
the production quality. That's what gets me, is the production quality.
My God. But you can still hear me.
Yeah, I can.
But I can't find the damn. I'm gonna have to just dial back in, guys. I can't find the damn. Here it is. This should get me there.
There we go. Look at that. Oh,
He got himself back and then he exited.
Yeah, disappeared. I think, Mark, you have to turn it to landscape instead of portrait.
He's not even in the waiting room anymore. He's just gone.
So one thing I was going to say though about what Mark was saying is, this is a long-standing problem in sports nutrition and exercise physiology, is that most of the research dollars, I should say, and funding, like Mark said, isn't allocated to healthy populations, because healthy populations don't require as much assistance staying healthy as pathological populations do in becoming healthy. So if you take amino acid metabolism research, Dr. Robert Wolf's focus is on sarcopenia, pathological muscle wasting, especially in elderly populations. And so a plethora of the data on amino acids. So can I describe how I think it starts? Because this is like a conceptual scale problem.
You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So
yes, please.
Scientific research is like, there's two parts to it. There's an artistic component and there's a scientific component. The scientific component, like I said, expresses for the verisimilitude function of science, that science differentiates between the truth and falsity of declarative statements or hypotheses. The art function, there's a craftsmanship, like what the Greeks called a techne, like a certain technique or a system that's associated with producing good science, right? So most of the original amino acid research, the craftsmanship, the real craft of constructing methodology, and methodology is its own craft distinct from science, right? It's part of science, but it needs to be considered, it needs to be situated, and you need to negotiate a proper methodology. That's created in the context of looking at potentially pharmaceutical solutions to sarcopenia or muscle wasting. So enter BCAAs versus EAAs. The problem is, once the methodology is introduced in the context of measuring for the effects of sarcopenia, or the potentially attenuating modality of sarcopenia, then that is transmitted into studying people like us. But people like us have a much higher, let's call it anabolic threshold, than does a 65-year-old woman whose muscle is wasting away. Our synthetic processes are tuned differently. Our constant, and I mean constant, muscle stimuli has created a different demand on a muscle protein synthetic process.
Yes.
We have a higher body weight, so naturally we command a higher amino acid demand anyways, and that effect seems to be linear and proportional. So you introduce into this situation a whole host of residual confounds that make the original study condition quite different from the study condition examining a couple exercise trained guys. And if you don't control for those residual confounds in your data, then what you will produce is contradictory results. But then the problem, Mark, like you said, is that either the researchers themselves get greedy with their conclusions, or people in our space exaggerate those conclusions, and they state, like you said, they go from suggestive, demonstrative research that was carefully controlled and potentially demonstrates a fairly narrow and rigid conclusion into it proves this. Dr. Robert Wolf destroyed BCAAs when none of that happened. No. And that makes conversations more difficult. And so when I was saying earlier that I don't think about BCAAs past these conversations. I don't actually take BCAAs myself, and I'm not economically incentivized towards BCAAs. I'm actually more economically incentivized towards EAAs, so I don't have a dog in this fight. It just bothers me when I love this industry, I love our space, and I would like for the level of dialogue in our space to attend to or be in accordance with the level of research that's produced. And when we reduce complex studies to top-line conclusions like X person destroys BCAAs, it coarsens the dialogue and it makes intelligent discussion more difficult, which then prevents more innovation, because people might be disincentivized for producing a BCAA product because their favorite influencer shit on it without understanding the underlying scientific enterprise.
I love fucking amino acids. I love EAAs. I love BCAAs. I have noticed benefits from them when I was natural. I did notice a significant increase in my recovery abilities on an anecdotal standpoint. And that's why we came out with our BCAA product, which popularized the intra-workout category. A lot of what you got to do, and I hate to do this, but a lot of times you just got to try some shit. And a lot of times you look at all the research on training, volume training, all that, man, that shit did everything was full body. Arnold and those guys came around. They started hammering fucking body parts twice a day, did volume training. All of a sudden, now there's data on volume training.
Yes, that shows that it's effective. Yeah.
Dorian came out. No one was doing it. He popularized Mentzer's methodology. Now you have data on beyond failure training, good and bad. You know, the thing is, without trying shit, you won't know. And we're finding new stuff every day. I'm learning new things every day. You know, Matt and I, you know, we've found Matt and me sit literally right next to each other all day. But we've literally been delving into different topics like, you know, the benefits of fasting, and it's not fat loss. You know,
it's longevity. Mostly.
Because the study we had, I went to the ISSN conference a month ago in Florida, and the guy who literally is he's the fasting guy. Like, this guy does all the research on fasting. It's what his lab does. It's their main thing. He's like, yeah, it didn't lose any more fat when calories were accounted for. But you got to look at other things it does, like blood sugar control, longevity, you know, things like that. So, and it just fucking kills dead cells. I mean, you know, autophagy is a real thing. But then you have camps who are anti-fasting, pro-fasting, and you know, I'll come out and I'll say the truth, like, hey, you know, fasting doesn't lead to fat loss. Go, oh well, and then something good comes out. Oh well, you were wrong. I'm like, no, I wasn't. I'm like, this data showed this. The thing is, everybody, it's just like politics, bro. Everybody's belonged to a fucking camp. I'm a keto. I'm intermittent fasting. I'm pro BCAA. I'm anti BCAA. I like pre-workout. You don't need pre-workout. I just drink coffee and cocaine. It's like, you dumb motherfuckers. I'm like, well, you just, like, here's the thing about data. It's tools. It's tools in your toolbox, you know? And as a coach, if you've ever prepped somebody, sometimes you're at a like, or if you're just prepping, just coaching somebody who's just trying to get in better shape, there's a point where you're like 3 weeks in and they won't, or 3 weeks away from whatever, they won't lose weight. You're like, well, let's try this. And then it happens. You're like, oh my God, we did something. And I know that's kind of a reach or a stretch of
No,
what
it's not.
we're discussing.
No.
But
No,
I'm a big believer in the fact that sometimes there isn't concrete data for why shit works. But BCAA, the crazy thing is there's more data on BCAA than there are a lot of things that the good bros are preaching, like SARMs. Like the data on SARMs is for like, I forgot what it was, like RAD or one of those. It's like the study dose, and they do have studies on SARMs. It's like 3 milligrams. Then I'm reading the bottle that for not for human consumption. I'm reading some shit online, like take 30 to 50 milligrams. Like, bro, you're over 10 times.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't know the safety data for 3 milligrams is great, but like safety data for a gallon of water is great. For drinking 3 gallons of water in a 10-minute period, you're dying of hyperemia.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like there's dose and duration and toxicity, and everything's toxic in the right dose. Water is fucking toxic.
Yeah, you can die of hyponatremia. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where you and I kind of see eye to eye is look, man, I love science. And that's where I think, in the last few years, our industry included, science has become all about feelings and tribalism. And that's bullshit. And I get out there and I stop speaking on topics. I'm like, it's like, well, I mean, when I came out and I did the video on vitamin D on this channel in March of 2020, I'm like, look, dude, it wasn't even called COVID back then. It was the coronavirus. And I'm like, hey, man, I don't know what the fuck this thing is going around. I just know that the flu shot is just about right on par with vitamin D in its efficacy. I'm like, so just fucking make sure you get your 5,000 IUs of vitamin D a day. And hey, get 15 minutes of sunlight. And then like, people were like, you got fucking mad. And I'm like, what'd I do? I'm like, I'm extrapolating. It's a virus. I'm figuring, I didn't know. I'm like, hey, if it worked for this virus, there's a possibility it could do something for this virus. But people are like, oh, you're a COVID denier. I'm like, whoa. It's just the flu. No, I never say it's not. It's literally not the flu. It's not the fucking flu. So my thing is, I love science. And I think that the problem is science has become weaponized and in so many ways, in so many industries. And part of the reason is that a lot of these researchers are just, they're doing things like Dr. Wolf does. I think that was not just a disservice to amino acids. I think it was a disservice to science.
Yeah, well, I agree. So there's two distinct but interrelated problems I'll describe the first problem. It's insider baseball because it's about academia. And the second problem is how this problem becomes diffuse and then via public consciousness osmosis, both in some senses creates and then potentiates the second problem. So the first problem is, it's a problem called academic entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship is a term that typically designates what people do in the market, right? What they do in civil society.
Yeah.
But the same pressures of entrepreneurship, based on the way that public funding has dried up at post-secondary institutions, has taken hold in these post-secondary institutions where people have a vested interest in maintaining a specific opinion on a research data or topic because their funding is tied to it. And it's very difficult to have, like, let's say a 10-year career tied to a certain position on a certain topic. All of your funding is associated with that. You've built up an infrastructure at a lab that your institution contributes public funding to that lab. There's private funding. Private funding normally has, let's say, insidious and invidious obligations attached to it that are not expressed but are intrinsic. And all of this creates a set of perverse incentives for academic researchers in ways that I don't think are conscious, that are subconscious, but it's just part of the machinery of entrepreneurship tends to exert this downward pressure on the way data is produced, right?
Yes.
And as a consequence, worthwhile data isn't produced because it infects even the level of which topics researchers choose to research. So when I was doing my PhD, I didn't get it. My supervisor was a prick and I hated him. But while I was doing my PhD, I had obtained some funding. And one of the first things that he told to me, I said, I want to research a topic called social demography. So I wanted to understand the constituent demographic and social factors that contributed to what I hypothesized to be disproportionately high miscarriage rates in the Aboriginal population in Canada. So I wanted to understand why First Nations women experience miscarriage rates so high.
That is fucking profound.
Yes. And the reason why I wanted to investigate that, Mark, is that their maternal and infant mortality rates are equivalent to Bolivia.
Really?
So yes, so in an
And
industrialized country,
is this industrialized? They have access to the medical care?
yeah. So in
Wow.
my country, one of the best countries on the planet, it is always rated first or second in healthcare, always rated first, second, or third in quality of life. We have 10% of the population who experiences maternal and infant mortality rates 4.5 to 6 times, depending on the province, higher than other ethnic groups. And that is equivalent to Bolivia. They could go live in Bolivia and they would die of pregnancy, or the children would die at the exact same rate, which is preposterous.
Insane. Yeah,
So
that's insane.
And now here's the problem. No data on miscarriage, none. Not a single study had ever been produced. So I wanted to produce that. And do you know what my PhD supervisor told me? And by the way, this is, I'm using this example because it's not exemplary, it's emblematic of this problem of academic entrepreneurship. It's not topical, and our department is the pediatrics department in the medical faculty. And it was bizarre for somebody like me to be admitted. They admitted me essentially based on MCAT scores that I took in some science classes.
I thought it was they just needed more gingers. I thought it was affirmative action.
It's like a diversity. It was like one of those diversity quotas.
We have too many souls here. We need someone soulless to complete it.
It's like increasing that ginger quota. So he tells me that it's not topical, and it's unlikely that I can make a career of funding based on that. So you should write your thesis on something topical, and then later on you can study that sort of problem.
Do you have? Can we get back to did you figure it out like on your own?
No,
like,
I was never allowed to study
that would, because I'm guessing it would be diet or environment.
Oh, absolutely. They would. My guess is, my hypothesis was that it was anywhere from 5 based on. So if you look at rates,
folic acid intake,
yes,
maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you look at exactly it. So if you look at all these social determinants that surround First Nations women in my country. Higher substance abuse rates, higher domestic abuse rates, higher malnutrition rates, lesser access to medical resources, fewer social supports. All of these things tend to exacerbate what we know to be deleterious social conditions. So I essentially aggregated those social determinants to provide for a hypothesis. This is called quantitative social demography, where you take a bunch of epidemiological data and you hypothesize for the rate at which a given social effect is expressed, and then try to understand the determinants that express for that effect. So I had hypothesized that it's anywhere from 5 to 7.5 times the miscarriage rate, which would be a silent epidemic and a silent kind of genocide.
That's an epidemic and a genocide. You're absolutely correct, yes, but exactly. A naturally occurring one that probably you could have figured it out. Like you could have implemented.
It could have made an impact.
Yeah. You could have saved millions of lives over the course of humanity.
Yeah, and no interest. I couldn't receive any funding. There's something called in my country the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and they offer a Joseph A. Bombardier Scholarship. They fully fund your graduate studies. It's $60,000 over 4 years. No interest from that. No interest from my institution. I went to the pediatrics department. I went to the graduate program director. I went to the dean of the medical faculty and said, I'm receiving pressure from my PhD supervisor to study this topic. He wanted me to study the rate of a specific mitochondrial disorder because that happened to correspond with his research. He was a neonatal intensive care physician. So he had much more empirical interest. Well, not empirical, he had much more molecular interest than I did. Went to those people, they weren't interested in it. So this problem, and by the way, this isn't just me using anecdata. There's real data demonstrating this is a problem. So this is the first problem. There's a problem of academic entrepreneurship. And then the second problem is, like I said, the way that academic entrepreneurs deliberately put data into the public consciousness, and the fact that most individuals don't have the ability, they don't have the scientific literacy, to distinguish between a meta-analysis and a narrative review. So the important methodologically solvent differences between these two types of original research do not get accounted for. And in that negative space in between fills stupid takes. And then those stupid takes inform people's stupid things that they do with these supplements. And it's unfortunate because I really believe that evidence-based supplementation is its own distinct medical modality.
Yes.
And that there are certain compounds when used. So you said it, Mark. And let's give some credit maybe to Tim. Tim Gritzman from Natural Body always says this. It's in what populations, why, when, and at what dose. That is how you assess a supplement's efficacy. And if all of our conversations considered those 4 constitutive factors, then we would have much more intelligent dialogue about how and where we can use exogenous supplementation to optimize our lives. But we don't have that conversation. And then the final point, Mark, is that you're right. Scientific discourse has become tribalized. And so every time a piece of data is produced, let's say it's in a political context about transgender athletes or something, conservatives will hold it up and show how some 15-year-old transgender kid is the fucking collapse of Western society. And then liberals will hold a different piece of data showing up that it's irrelevant, when it's neither. It's neither the collapse of Western society, nor is it irrelevant, because it involves people's deeply held beliefs about bifurcated gender roles and whether or not you agree with that. You have to make an epistemic space to discuss those sorts of things. And the more that you pollute scientific data and make it adversarial and combative, the less epistemic space you give yourself to have a conversation between people who might disagree. And that's sad. It's sad for a whole host of reasons.
As a man who has a daughter who plays sports, and I'm not going to make this the conversation topic because it's kind of moot. But here's the deal, man. If my daughter loses, look, at the end of the day, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And if dudes start dominating female sports, I'm sure there'll be a what the fuck situation. I'm like, dude, let them win the Olympics. Let them take it away. See what happens. The feminists will be like, whoa, wait a second. And I think it's going to hit ahead. It's not the collapse of civilization. It's a sport. It's a game. Don't give a fuck. At the end of the day, we're competing on a level playing field in business. It's different in sport. My main concern is injury. Believe it or not, I don't give a shit. Look, dude, here's the thing, man. Girls aren't getting full rides to college anyway. They're getting 20% scholarships to a $60,000 school. These guys who think there's actual money in female athletics and scholarships, they're completely either oversold by their soccer club or completely they don't understand how it works. These girls are getting offered partial scholarships. It's mediocre. You're better off now. In Tennessee, we have free college. So first 2 years of community college is free. Everybody's better off, no matter what your scholarship offer as a female, going to the first 2 years of community college if finances are your problem. Don't give a fuck. What I'm worried about is Billy, who's now Betty, is running full speed, bigger, stronger, faster, with a proper Q angle. And, little Julie over here, who's a biological female with a 17-degree difference in her Q angle, and they run into each other, and she has an ACL tear. That's my main concern. Other than that, I'd love to see my daughter just beat the shit out of biological, dude. I'm cool with it. I mean, I'm down. I'm like, bring it on. But that's my mentality. I'm one of those guys, I'm that guy in the boxing gym who's really bad, but will spar anybody. Yes. I'm kind of like Brent, Matt. We had this guy at our gym, Brent. He's a 140-pound guy, but he will spar a professional heavyweight. The guy's out of his fucking mind. Mm-hmm. But basically, line him up, knock him down. That's kind of our mentality. But I see but the problem is you exaggerate everything to get your point across. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the negotiation point where you start with say you got $100,000 house.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you ask $200,000, hoping to meet at 150. So it's like, oh my God, this is the collapse of civilization. No, it's fucking, dudes in dresses playing sports. Let's just bring it down to something politically incorrect. Whatever. Don't care. He, him, pronouns don't bother me. If someone has he, him in their bio, I'm not like, oh my God, that's so bad. I'm like, that's cool. He's a he, he's a him, whatever. Mm-hmm. And if it's a guy who's a she, her, if it's a biological, I'm like, okay, fuck it, miss, whatever. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect me. It's not the class society. But that's getting to your point. I'm a pretty conservative guy. I live in Tennessee. I have a nuclear family. But honestly, I have other things to worry about, like wars and taxes and I don't know, overreaching pandemic responses. I'm worried about that. I'm not worried about a guy with he, him, or she, her in his fucking Twitter bio.
Mm-hmm. But don't you think like that issue? So the only reason I'm interested in that is about 1 in every 1,000 live births are transgender individuals. So we're talking about 0.1%, roughly, from an epidemiological basis. And then once you take into consideration all the sociological factors that are going to exert a downward pressure on these individuals entering into sports, they're usually in their teens. Like the bullying rate for individuals who transition
so high.
10 times. The teen suicide rate is like 10 times.
It's disturbing. And
yes.
I know I am friends with multiple transgender people.
Yeah, we did that really good video on that transgender bodybuilder where you were actually super supportive, and I think I commented on that. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Janae.
Yes,
yeah. You know, I was friends with her when she was a great powerlifting man, and I've always been very, look, man, I want people to be happy in the skin they're in. Like, if people look at my body, and I get it all the time, because I have very veiny abs, and and right now I'm leaner than ever, and it looks stupid, and people, ew, that's disgusting. But I'm really happy in the skin I'm in, so I don't want society to pressure me to be something I'm not, and I also don't think that anybody's going to become transgender because it's the hip thing to be.
Exactly. Exactly. It's such a shitty life. Like, why would anybody do that?
I mean, and also the thing is, like, I was doing a ride along with one of my distributors back in the day, and it was in the South. Guy was pretty religious, and we had not an argument, but of course I was like, he's like, nah, man, there's no such thing as being gay. It's all societal. I'm like, I don't know, dude. Like, I knew the first time I walked into a men's locker room and I didn't get a boner, I wasn't gay. Like, if I walked into a bunch, like, okay, I walked in the male locker room at Culver City High School, saw a bunch of penises of all colors, shapes, and sizes. And I snuck a peek, and I was like, not one thought went through my head, like, I would like to put my mouth on that, you know? But if I walked into the cheerleading locker room, I'd have an erection, and I'd be like, I would like to, you know, do nasty things to those ladies. So it's definitely, in my opinion, it's definitely genetic. I don't think you can just like be like, and I think people can find, I think there's actually data. I think it was out of Harvard. It was one of the smart universities, the ones that I couldn't get into, nor could I afford. Yale, I think it was Yale. They did a study, and it was using pornography as visual stimulus. And they found that men cannot be bisexual, but women can. I have it in my computer notes somewhere, but you can look it up. So men do not have the ability, according to this study, and I'm cherry picking like a motherfucker. They do not have the ability to be bisexual. So men are either gay or straight, but women, and I have a theory on that, men are more physical. You know what I mean? Like, we're innately more, whereas women, they like flowers and shit, and they like emotional orgasms. Men can look at a wall, jerk off, and we're good, you know? So I think there's something to be said about that. But yeah, I completely, I'm not, it's a nothing burger to me. Even as a dad who literally is in California right now, helping my daughter's athletic future. You know, I don't think it's enough of a number to change sports. You might have the one-offs.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to. Yeah, so the bisexual thing, send me that study, because I'd have to see that. But
I will find it for you.
Yeah, do it. Yeah, if you don't mind. That's exactly the point that I was trying to make on the transgender thing, though, is that the emotional valence that this is assumed in popular consciousness is totally disproportional to its practical impact, right? Like, when one half of 1% of athletes may be transgender and entering into a competitive field that does not correspond to the gender assigned to them at birth. What I feel bad for is that, actually, let me see two things. There's an interesting sociological argument or a sociological fact to understand why the emotional valence on this is so high and so disproportional to its practical impact. That's one set of factors, right?
Yes.
Right. And then the other set of factors is, what does it say about us as a society that we're putting these high schoolers in this position where we're blasting their name and face all over national media and holding them up either, let me be clear on both sides, holding them up either as martyrs, where one group of people like transgender activists, and I mean this in the much more narrow and reductive sense than like fucking Tucker Carlson. I mean like a very subset of militant activists, holding them up as martyrs and exploiting their real human condition for their political gains. Or on the other hand, people who hold the positive condition, holding them up as pariahs and as if this is the collapse of Western society. I'm fine to have a sober and dispassionate discussion about either the physiological imbalances associated with a certain degree of biological maleness and its transition to transgenderedness, right? That's a conversation to have, and I think you alluded to that, Mark. The other conversation is, why the fuck does this consume so much attentional oxygen, and these poor trans kids are being used as, like, exploited as political pawns, you know?
So here's the argument from the athletic standpoint, and I'm just stating this. This is not my opinion.
Yeah.
The argument is the natty bodybuilding argument. How many drugged up? Look at Mr. Universe. Yeah. I could tell you right now, I watched Mr. Universe, and I saw the people placing, and they're not natural. So the argument is, and of course, everybody knows nobody's natural in the universe, and the guys who are natural are getting bottom 4. So, I mean, that's it, Mr. Universe. I don't know why the fuck they still call it a natty show. I think you didn't take it. You didn't take anything that day, but at the end of the day, so you had the OCB and obviously working with Doug all those years and Doug being the fake natty king, but Doug is actually natural. So that's the funny part. By the way, we're going to get so much hate for saying that. But I've traveled with Doug.
It makes people so mad. We've both been around him for months at a time. He is either the world's greatest fucking liar and escapes to nowhere to do his drugs.
I toured 3 countries with this fucker.
Yes.
He doesn't know shit. Like he knows everything about supplements. He's on our level, right? He's at our playing field.
Absolutely.
But as far as steroids, guy is not playing. He's dumb as fuck. He doesn't know what the fuck they do. He doesn't know what to mix with what.
Yes.
And because we'd be in a store and he's like, I have no clue what you're talking about. Because people be like, so what are you really taking? He's like, and he'd joke around. He'd say the stupidest cycles. Yes. And I'm like, okay, this guy doesn't know his drugs. But so the argument is that people love trophies and they love winning. The argument is that this will force mediocre men to pretend to be women. Since the problem is there's no barrier of entry. I can literally tomorrow walk into a bodybuilding show or powerlifting meet and say, hey, I'm a chick. And they have to say, okay. So that's the question.
That argument I can get down with. Like, I can understand that, yeah.
So my thing is, look, man, my thought, my opinion right now, and it could change tomorrow, is I'm not going to put much thought into fighting it, but I do believe that sport should be based on biology. What you were born as, what's between your legs. And that's that, because feelings are different than biology. And that's the problem, is that we've conflated biology with feelings. At the end of the day, when you're born, you're man or woman. When I'm breeding dogs, I need a male stud and a female breeding tool, whatever the fuck they call them. So, I mean,
dame.
Dame?
A sire and a dame for dogs.
Whatever, bitches. So,
yeah, they used to call them bitches and studs. Now they call them sires and dames.
Okay, I'll go with bitches. I prefer that. So that's where I stand currently, is that I'm of the thought of biology.
And is that influenced so heavily because you have, and this is the other thing that I want to ask you. So I would say, so like, let's say the middle is right here. You're on this increment on the one side, and I'm on this increment on the other side. So there's not that much distance between our positions. We're just on other sides. Yeah. But the reason why I don't find your position disingenuous is I fucking hate, it just drives me nutty when either a pundit on either side starts talking about fairness in female sports, but they couldn't name one soccer player who's a woman. They couldn't name a single player. And I'm like, you don't care about female sports, but you, like, because your daughter is involved in sports, you are heavily involved in female sports.
It's all bias, bro. I mean, that's the thing, is that life experience dictates opinion. And I've used this argument all the time. I was pro-choice. I was fucking, kill the babies, and fucking overpopulation. I was pulling with Bill Gates on that ass. Yeah. And then my wife and I had a miscarriage.
Oh, that can change. A miscarriage is a profound event.
And then I realized, dude, this isn't a fetus. Yeah. Like, I was fucked. Like, I don't know if every other dude takes it this hard.
Oh, they do.
But I was, for 8 weeks or more, because bodybuilders think of everything in weeks, right? Yeah, weeks, yeah. I think it was about 8 weeks. I was fucked.
Bereft.
Like, I was like, you ever train and you don't want to train and you're just kind of doing.
You're disassociating. You're there, but you're not present.
I wasn't alive. Like, and that's when I realized, wait a second, this is a life and this is murder. And again, a lot of people might disagree with me, but that's fine. And that's why when we vote, we have votes, because my opinion isn't everybody's opinion. And a lot of people need to realize, like, I can't believe you think that way. I'm like, I understand why people like socialism. Mm-hmm. I have Blinkist, which is phenomenal. It's an app that has 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I literally, one day I was driving to a practice. I was coaching at Campton in Illinois. And on the way to Campton, I listened to a book on capitalism. On the way home, I listened to a book on socialism. Awesome. And then I listened to a book on UBI, and then which is universal basic income. Yeah. And the thing is, that's the problem, is that the one thing that separates humans from animals is empathy. Yeah. We can empathize. Like, I can think right now, like, if I said, oh man, I hate gingers, I can empathize and put myself
Mhm.
how would I feel if I was Kenton and he
Yeah.
called
Getting
me
kicked
that?
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and then but luckily you have no feelings because you have no
Yeah,
soul.
that's fine.
So so just kidding.
Yeah.
So my thing is, what we lack in society is empathy.
Empathy gap. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
Dude. Yeah.
and I think that and I think the internet's caused a big dissociation
Mhm.
with feelings and with people, because when you're just dealing with either written word or spoken word, you're missing out on a lot of senses, right? You're missing out on sometimes visual, sometimes olfactory, like scent can change everything, sometimes audio. It's like you look at all these different things we're missing out on. And so I think that social media has allowed our senses to be dulled. And now we're lacking this empathy, which is why we could take a like, how could you vote for Trump or how could you vote for Biden? And then you don't realize that, wait a second, my opinion is my opinion based on my life experiences.
Topography. Topographies are always three-dimensional. What social media has done is it's taken these richly textured, richly contoured first-hand experiences in a three-dimensional topography and rendered them into a two-dimensional space. And so all the nuance that's associated with this three-dimensional space is lost. So before we leave, I want to comment on your miscarriage statement. So the reason why I was interested in studying
one moment, Kenton.
Yep.
We're having
Ken,
an
it
audio.
sounds like you're going through a robot right now.
I think that's my programming coming to the surface. Everyone always accuses me of like a robot. I think that's just.
I do think it's the Canadian internet.
Yeah, is it better now or is it still janky?
It's janky.
It's better janky though.
Weird. I guess we call it, or I can sign back on if we want to hammer up the last few minutes.
You want to just click the link again and we'll let you back in. Yep.
Give me 2 seconds. Yeah.
All right, you got it. Hey Matt, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Doing great. So we have about 10 minutes left. What do you say we go to some Q&A after he hits on? Do we have any questions in there?
We do. We have a couple questions from Big Spoon Bear, who has been waiting. He's been waiting very patiently for his questions to be answered.
He's the Big Spoon Bear.
Let's see. Add Ken back in. Ken's back.
Oh,
there we go.
So I wanted to make and the reason why I wanted to make that point is the reason why I was interested in studying miscarriage rates in First Nations women is that my mother is a researcher in nursing. So she's been she has a PhD in nursing. She's been a researcher my entire life. And a significant portion of her research has surrounded miscarriage. Her research first surrounded what used to be called elderly primipara and now is called elderly first-time birth mothers, which is ridiculously defined still in the medical literature as any woman who has their first-time birth over the age of 35, which the average age of birth now is actually 28.5. So the idea that it's elderly primipara is ridiculous. Anyway, so she was doing all this research in miscarriages. And my philosophical position, and not just my emotive position, my philosophical position based on the most persuasive articles that I found in bioethics, which was a focus of mine when I was doing my philosophy degree, inclined me to, I don't even like calling them pro-choice and pro-life position, inclined me to a position that it's not seriously immoral to abort a fetus, right? Helping her compile that data forced me to expose myself to other research articles that took the position that it is seriously immoral to abort a fetus. And this is coming from somebody living in Canada, even though I live in like the Alabama of Canada, it tends to be a little bit more of a progressive country. Yeah. So our abortion debate was decided a long time ago. Nobody ever brings it up. In fact, a conservative candidate, a guy named Andrew Scheer, lost the election most probably because he wouldn't denounce abortion. And the reason why I'm mentioning this though, is that social media has become so toxic, Mark, that the top line conclusion that people would take from this is that you're anti-choice, right? What they would leave out is how richly textured your experience was, and that you had this deeply profound, determinative experience that shifted your abstract position because it rendered something that was for you abstract into something that's visceral. And that viscerality you couldn't just disassociate from, you couldn't disconnect from. The empathy gap where we can't connect with other people's experiences and understand how a whole system of pressures constellate on a single individual to produce for an opinion. About, like I said, about the scientific dialogue, it coarsens the dialogue. So when you said that, my immediate thought was I had a similar experience examining the miscarriage data, reading these women's experiences. Listening to them talk about it, it is heartbreaking, and you have to be a psychopath not to understand how difficult a miscarriage is. You also have to be a psychopath not to understand that men aren't allowed to connect with miscarriages because it's not our child until it comes out. While it's in the mother's womb, it's the mother's. And so we have no bereavement period. There's no nationally mandated bereavement period or grief period in Canada. You can't take days off. You can be fired, by the way, if you take a day off for your child's miscarriage in Canada, which is deeply problematic. So when I hear your experience, I go, that makes a lot of sense to me. And even if I disagree, so philosophically, I think I still lean towards women having the ability to choose because it's a conceptual scale problem. I have a computational difficulty rendering the singular ethical problem to scale and understanding how that scale change propagates the moral effects. But hearing your side, I'm not like, what a fucking asshole. I'm like, man, I can't believe you went through that. And I completely understand why you feel the way you feel.
Yeah. I mean, or we could just change it and call it legal murder and see if people still get them. But look, man, I'm of the opinion that we all have opinions, and that's why in a democratic system, and I know we're a constitutional republic based on democratic systems here. That's how we work. And again, each state is different. So while Alabama might be no abortions, you could travel over the state border and get your abortion. So that's the thing about the United States of America. It's 50 sovereign states. On that note, Matt, are there any questions?
There are. So I've got to scroll all the way back up to the top here. All right. Quick one. Easy one. Are BCAAs different than liquid aminos that you would add into your food?
Yes.
Add into food. Yes. All right.
So liquid aminos, he's talking about Bragg's. Liquid aminos, I believe that's like soy sauce, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it's like an amino-based soy sauce. So I just wanted to nail that one with a quick yes.
Yeah.
Kenton, are we wrong?
No.
Okay.
Are amino acids retrievable in a plant-based diet? And if not, would it make sense for someone on a plant-based diet to supplement their amino acid intake?
Yeah. I mean, if you're on a plant-based diet, provided that you're intaking fermentable BCAAs as opposed to duck feather or animal tissue-derived BCAAs. This is actually an interesting problem that crops up in the data too, is like the viability of vegan diets and whether or not they can optimize for muscle protein synthetic activity. Seems pretty conclusive that they can't. This is just a descriptive point that plant proteins are not complete. They don't have protein digestibility corrected amino acid scores that are equivalent to animal tissue. There's a whole host of deleterious downstream effects associated with intaking incomplete proteins, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't eat a plant-based diet, but if we're talking about athletic optimization, it's clearly inferior.
Just look at Cam Newton's injuries and performance. But I also will, what we do with Planta, which is Ambrosia's protein, is we add Sun BCA, which are fermented BCA, and we add the 2:1 to which makes the ratio closer. And brown rice and pea, when combined, are decently complete. I think they achieve somewhere around an 80 score.
Yeah, it's an 82,
Yeah, so I mean, when you add in the BCA, I'd like to say it's not way, but it's there.
It's close.
Getting an adequate level of good protein without supplementing with a good vegan protein powder, I'd say would be very difficult.
Yeah, very hard. I agree.
All right. Would you advocate for full body, high volume training to break through post-new plateau?
The post-new plateau, is that a scientific term?
Yes, that's
basically, I think it's from
Harvard.
noob to intermediate, beginning to intermediate. I honestly, I've always, so with training, I know, Kenton, you're kind of like me with ADHD. It's like, I believe that if volume is accounted for and it seems similar at the end of the week, I think it's very similar to fasting, as long as the calories are accounted for. So I hate full body training. I get bored. I don't feel a pump. Some people love it. Look, dude, if you want to try it, go ahead. I personally like body part splits or upper lower, or push pull legs. But if you want to try it and see how you like it, just make sure you're getting adequate intensity and volume.
One thing I would say, I want to make a point about how powerful are the body's homeostatic mechanisms. So there's a tribe, nobody butcher me on this. I think it's in Nigeria. If it's not, don't complain. But they're a tribe called the Hadza. And the Hadza are one of the last fully nomadic peoples left on Earth. So they have no agriculture, they have no horticulture. They are fully a hunter-gathering society, right? And both men and women walk somewhere around 10 kilometers daily on average, which is a pretty significant walking length, right?
Yeah.
So there is a researcher, a bioenergetics researcher at Duke, who has went out into the field and hooked them up to full body, the equivalent of full body calorimeters, essentially just looking at the carbon expulsion rate. Carbon expulsion rate is essentially the best mechanism we have to measure calories, right? Because carbon dioxide is just a waste product. He hypothesized that their basal metabolic rate, once you equate for lean tissue, which is the most determinative factor, would be about double, right? As compared to the average North American. So he thought that the women, it would be somewhere around 4,500, and for men, it would be around 5,000 calories daily as their basal metabolic rate. Exact same. And in 3 equivalent replication studies, exact same. So despite the fact that these people are engaging in anywhere from 10 to 20 times the daily activity of even an athlete in our society, their basal metabolic rate was equivalent. And the way that he explains it is that the body's homeostatic mechanisms are so powerful that all of these tertiary quaternary support mechanisms that are metabolically inefficient in us become extremely metabolically efficient in them. So the body needs to devote less of its bioenergetic resources to servicing them. Whereas in the North American situation, we become incredibly metabolically inefficient. And so it takes more resources to support things like the immune system. The reason why I'm bringing up in the context of training is that, number one, training is always going to contribute not a meaningless amount, but it's not a significant amount to your caloric expenditure. So whenever you're talking about a weight loss diet, it's your basal metabolic rate. Secondly, what that Hodza study appears to demonstrate is that daily variation is the only way to overcome a plateau, like a bioenergetic plateau. I think you have to keep your body in constant confusion, and that's the only way to do it. And therefore, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter which modality you pick. It's that the modality you pick has to contain for a specific amount of variation in order for you to stop your body from acclimating to it, because your body's so homeostatically powerful.
Very true. And there's also, just stemming on that, I know it's a bit off the question, but there's also data to suggest that exercise is vitally important in keeping weight off, but not as important as getting weight off.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which kind of, if you put 2 and 2 together, it's kind of what Kenton's
the hot saying. Yeah.
Yep. Anything else, Matt?
That's it.
All right. Well, listen, man, we got to have you back on. There's so many topics we could delve into. I know we all have a full day of work. I know Matt's got project up the Yin Yang. I'm here in California. So we appreciate having you on. Where can they find you, and what are you doing now?
So they can find me at Savage Ginger Beard. I don't really post on my Instagram. Doug and I have a number of projects on the go. We have a couple cool things in the pipeline for a little bit later this year. I'll once we are able to talk about that, I'll come talk about it, because it's very different from what we would normally do. That's
fantastic. And again, you can find him, of course, on Instagram, and what he does a lot behind the scenes. But we really appreciate having you on. Would love to have you on again in the near future and in the distant future, maybe as a regular. A lot more scientifically. A lot of times we get in here, we bro it out with some people, we talk about some anecdotes, but hopefully a lot of people got a lot of in-depth explanation of how we think and how things work, and the behind the scenes of formulating supplements, and also how we look at research.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on. I'll come back anytime.
Thanks so much, man. You guys have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. See you guys.
Take care.